Welcome back. Today, I'm talking to Marvin Marwah, indie producer extraordinaire. From indie shorts, to features, to music videos, and commercial land, Marvin has done them all. In this conversation, he breaks down the difference between producer credits and gives us his perspective on how to make a high-quality production. At the end of today's talk with Marvin, stay put for another performance from Silent St. J, her song Nostalgia. All right, welcome back to another episode of Creative Conversations, brought to you by the Omnia Theater. Today we are talking to Marvin. I don't want to butcher your last name. Can you pronounce it for me, please?
Oh, it's Marwah.
Marva?
Yeah.
Marvin Marwah?
Yeah, there we go.
That's actually super easy. I way overcomplicated it in my head.
It's like Eminem.
Have you ever gone as Eminem for Halloween?
I have not. I feel like a brown man portraying a white man costume might not fly that well.
Reverse blackface?
I could try. Maybe. I might get canceled.
Maybe, yeah. Also, it'd be like you'd have to bleach your hair.
Yeah, I can't do that. Yeah. I feel like genetically, I'm pretty happy where I'm at. So
tell me a little bit about your career trajectory. You're in the film industry and you run your own production company, right? Like an indie production company?
Sort of, yeah. I normally work as a freelance producer basically these days.
Okay.
We did have a company going on with some of my creative partners, but lately I've been working as a line producer for other companies or other business ventures and stuff. But we're in the process of kind of changing up a few things and starting up basically like a new brand or a company. I think for me, it's just I'm still in the vein of figuring out what does that company want to specialize in or what the niche is.
Right.
Because
right
niche
now is very important.
Yeah, right now I've just been getting way more work freelancing for other clients and companies like that. Yeah. So
can you please dive in a little bit to the different types of producers? What is a line producer compared to an executive producer compared to honestly, I know there's half a dozen different producer names, and I'm not I've looked them up a couple times trying to discern the difference between them, and there's a lot of gray area between some of the different producer types. Can you touch on that for us, please?
Yeah. What's funny is I was just reading an article the other day with I think it was Jeff Goldblum. He was just talking about it, and he was like, "There's too many damn producers these days because there's
so many
producers in marketing and whatever." I just think it's because the project is just so damn big now, a big investment. So it's it's basically a Fortune 500 company in itself. So if you have, 400 people tied to a project, it's almost like a producer is needed for every single level of it. Or the opposite is true where you just want to give someone a fancy title. Normally, how I like to think of it as an executive producer, someone's that is somehow tied with the financing or the money part, or their fiduciary responsibility is to execute a certain stage of that project. They're supplying something that is very much needed for the project. That you have a producer who handles the creative aspects of the project. You just give them a producing title. Those guys are usually part of the PGA, and I'm just talking in film terms or TV show terms, and they're the creative heads of the project. Then you have an associate producer who's quite often the assistant of the producer. And most times they've been working for the producer long enough where they just get an associate producing title.
Okay.
Then you have a line producer. They are responsible for the financial aspects of the show. So they're normally dealing with schedules, budgets, quite often for movies. Because I'm just going to talk about movies for now. They report to the studio directly or the investor. So that's what I do a lot of times. Where
did they find investors?
They did not. Normally, they just get hired on.
Oh, okay.
The investors are quite often either the executive producers themselves or the creative producer found those. The line producer's job is just to make sure the train's running, numbers are all good.
Gotcha.
Yeah, they hire the crew, and then you have a co-producer, which is quite often tied with the producer. I'm just going to say they're the best friend that shows up late to the party. and there's
cherry picks the goal.
supplying beer. Yeah. And then on TV shows, executive producers are often writers. The line producer always does the same kind of job in either or medium, even in commercials, but the producing title can change hands.
Okay. Yeah, my impression of executive producers has always been that they just write the checks. Like, the first show that I worked on was Motherland Season 1,
Right.
and it was a big thing that Will Ferrell was an executive producer on it, but he never touched boots in Vancouver while he was doing it. So, like, how associated, I guess a lot of producers can be decently detached from the project, whereas some are very much more hands-on and like...
Yeah, and what's a funny story is, I keep forgetting the person that, so Yellowstone is made by the producer. Are you familiar with the movie Untouchables?
Yes.
So he has a book, it's called Trenches of Producing, and he talked about his journey as an executive producer, and he was just saying he developed this movie 10 years ago, and 10 years later the movie gets made. He doesn't have any part in the project anymore. He just developed it 10 years ago and he sold it to the studio. He still got an executive producer credit. So that can also happen.
How does it work? Like, if he sells that project to the studio, does he still get royalties on it? Or is he just like, he's washed his hands of it when he's sold it?
It goes both ways. If you aren't making money on the front end, you can negotiate a back end deal. It doesn't happen anymore because streaming has changed that model a lot. But back in the old days, you could get that, or they could just write you a check. Basically, when a project is in development, it gets greenlit. Say the studio doesn't really know what to do with it. What they can do is they'll be like, okay, this is in development. We're going to keep developing this more, but we're going to write you a blank check, walk away from the project. We'll just own the rights to it. So it can go either way, basically, yeah.
Huh. I'm curious. So earlier you were saying that you started, like, you got into producing because you were working as a producer's assistant on A Million Little Things. How did your career path move from there? Like, how did you go from production assistant, office production assistant? What was your actual title?
So I was an office production assistant, but I've actually been in film since high school. So I've been working in film since grade 11, funny enough.
This has always been your dream?
Yeah, sort of. I mean, I never wanted to go in producing in the first place. I was very interested in working in the art department or even being everyone wants to be a director, I guess. But
it is the classic.
For me, it was honestly fueled by two things because I've done like most jobs in film. So from an early age, it started as a special effects assistant, kind of moved my way into visual effects and done a lot of ADing and stuff, so assistant directing on the side as well. For me, producing was essentially one of the things I think a lot about with the film industry is the amount of hours that go into this project. Mm-hmm. And using the Will Ferrell analogy, one thing I think for me personally is I'd like to have a family one day. I think this job doesn't allow it as much. So
it is very difficult. There's a lot of broken families and divorces in the film
unfortunately,
industry.
Yeah. But I think the other thing was, for me, it was, okay, I am very good at bringing people together, it seems. Also, a bunch of jobs I did before getting into producing in film, I sucked at. So realized that super quick, and I was like, I think I'm really good at bringing people together. I'm really good at, I want to be creative. What's a job I can do where I can do that? The hours can be a bit more manageable. For me personally, it was producing because you can go very hard to put the project together, but when it's filming, then luckily you can hire out other people, like a production manager or someone, to oversee that process, and you can kind of step back a bit. So in my head, it was like, okay, 20 years from now, maybe if I have a family, I can at least manage that part of my life a bit better. So that was kind of always in the back of my head, because working in high school, you basically are working with these older gentlemen and you're like learning so much about what perspective they have 45 years from now kind of thing. So
that's a very interesting thing to think about, especially because the film industry is something that's changed so much, even in the last 20 years, like the way that crews are treated, the way that departments interact, the things that are allowed or no longer overlooked. Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit about how producing has changed in the last 20 years compared to perhaps some of the other departments, like, well, I mean, an easy example to give listeners a little bit of context is like the lowest position in a production assistant. These people used to be forced to stand for anywhere between 15 and 20 plus hours a day. A lot of people wouldn't even give them chairs because they thought that they weren't working if they were sitting down, kind of thing. So, like, going from that extreme to today where people are more concerned with mental health, more concerned with giving people the breaks that they need and the rest that they need, how has producing changed over that course?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting thing, I think, because producing was, I think in the old days now, I feel like honestly there was a lot more freedom on who could essentially, how you could package a project, you could bring it to a studio. It is changing rapidly in the sense there's less control that a producer has now versus back then, I think.
Okay.
It's kind of gone the opposite, but it's also a good thing because maybe in film and TV, there's that argument that, okay, we could like essentially bring a project, package it up, bring it to a studio. You know, maybe the studio might be interested because in the early 2000s, what was happening is, as we're all familiar, the romantic comedies that were getting made for like these super cheap like amounts, which were like 5 to 10 million, they were just being like busted out like Christmas, basically, like 50, 60, you know?
Especially if you watch the W Network around Christmas.
Totally. And then when the superhero movies started coming out, that concept started changing. And then when streaming came out, it changed even more because essentially what was happening is they were realizing, okay, we maybe don't need to make that much quantity anymore. We'll make less movies, but with more money, because the punch that will be packed with the money on our reinvestment would be, you know, you make like $100 million movie and you get like, I don't know, some insane like $300-400 million back. So that kind of changed that model where producers now could afford to make these cheaper movies and have more control. But then as, you know, the 2010 kind of that saga emerged, it was almost like, okay, we now don't really need a producer. We need like a project manager that, you know, a studio can essentially own the project. The producer's like gonna be involved, but not involved in the same vein as one of those Adam Sandler movie producers would be involved. So that kind of changed. I think streaming impacted that even more. But on the flip side of this thing, there's now way more producers emerging than way before, because now I could advertise something to TikTok. I could start my own podcast channel. Mm-hmm. And, you know, the avenues now are just next to none. Like I'm seeing, like my journey was very similar to anyone else's, where I started as a PA and, you know, got shit end of the stick.
Yep.
I'm talking standing in the rain for 15, 16 hours, people forgetting about you.
Been there. I think 18 and a half was my longest day.
Right. And it was insane. But now I'm talking to people who have successfully launched producing careers just off of TikTok.
Well, I mean, right. Here's hoping. That's essentially what we're trying to do here.
No, totally. But my point is, before maybe it was a little easier to make films and TV, but now producing as a whole is, because I think a producer isn't just limited to film or TV. One of the things that excites me about my job is I don't ever have to be limited to just a camera and telling that. Like I love podcasts, I love art, whatever. I think a producer can mean many different things, you know, because I think for me, a producer isn't just stitching the technical and creative aspects of a project. I think you're producing things. I think anyone can be a producer if they want to.
Very much so. And I kind of liken that to, like, my whole thing is that humans are born to be creators. And, like, I feel like in this sense, producer is just another synonym for creator in that sense, because you are a person that is foundationally responsible for the development of a project. I find it really interesting that you mentioned that historically they would put out like more content, in the sense of like they push out tons of these cheaper movies, because comparing it to the way that Disney has been operating lately, they've almost been using that old model but with extremely high budget content. Like they've been like comparing phase 3 of the Marvel canon to phase 4, there was something like I don't know, 20 shows or movies in phase 3, and then to phase 4 it spiked to like 70 or something like that. And I only realized that when I was having a conversation with one of my friends and had said that, what did Marvel even put out in phase 4? I feel like phase 4 is over and I don't even really know what they did.
Right.
And then he was like, well, actually they did a lot. And he sent me this picture, and then he started listing off all the different shows that they did. And I was like, yeah, okay, I actually knew about a lot of these, and I did not think about any of them because they just like, it feels like they stopped caring about quality at some point along the Marvel series.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? I think a lot of it would have to, like in the early 2000s, there was a big DVD sale boom going on where they realized that we're going to make this movie for 10 to 20 million. We're going to put this in the theater. Sure, it'll give us back like 10 million in theater sales, but in DVD sales, it'll actually keep giving us more and more. Obviously, when streaming came, that entire thing collapsed on its head.
And how many people buy DVDs anymore?
Totally. And I think for them, the realization was, okay, this needs to go to streaming. But the issue with streaming is it's largely marketing dominated now. And that is also what's changing our business model because, I think Matt Damon said it best. It was, if I'm making a project for 50 million, as a producer, there's going to be another 50 million that's going to be needed for marketing for that project. On the scale that I guess I am working on, which is indie movies these days, we also have exact same problem where we are realizing we need to market these movies to have any chance to compete with the big dogs, So as an industry, we're now in that field where marketing is just dominating everything. The issue, though, is the budgets aren't going higher. So we've been at this budget stagnation level for the last 10 years now. And if I compare that with any other industry, inflation would actually, increase wages or do things. But it happens in the union world, but it doesn't happen in the independent world. And
interesting.
Yeah, and for better or worse, Canadian budgets and Canadian industry is just independent.
They've always been horrible. That's like, I have a bit of a background in trying to start tech companies.
Right.
And one of the interesting things, like I actually fell into the film industry after getting fired there was a coup at my company that I started in university. One of the co-founders, she went behind my back and the back of our two other co-founders and made a deal with the independent board member that we had. And she got me fired and got herself the role of CEO. And didn't tell the other two until the night after they had served me the papers, and they were just livid because they were the two that voted I should be CEO over her because they didn't like that she was kind of two-faced and clearly she definitely showed her colors there. But after that, I fell into the film industry, kind of touching on life gives you what you need, right? Because I had been wanting to embrace my creative side more. And I noticed a lot of parallels between like being an entrepreneur, trying to get your company off the ground, trying to find funding, like building your project. You really have your hands in all aspects of it when you're like a founder of a company. And I noticed that being very similar to producers trying to get a show off the ground, trying to get funding for it, trying to get exposure. And then it naturally drew me in as something I was interested in, just being so similar, being paralleled. So I'm kind of curious of your take on the difference between indie producing and union producing. Like, how much of a difference is there? How much more complicated or easy is one than the other?
Yeah, it's kind of like, you said you were talking about that tech company, and people voted, and it's kind of like a small tech company versus Facebook, where but it has its own things, like I think a indie movie, I think my big thing is always with film or anything actually is it's all about who is the audience of this specific thing. So this podcast, who is the audience? Same goes the budget, who's the audience? When I make a pitch package, who's the audience? With a union, thing, I think, model, what happens is you have more money to play with, but less control.
Mm-hmm.
There's a large studio funding it. Maybe it's a company funding it. But the point that I'm trying to make is when you have more money, there are more stakeholders, like anything.
More strings, yeah.
Yeah, more strings attached, for sure. So you might be getting like a pretty sweet deal on the check, but maybe on the creative side, you're still kind of in that vein. You know, on the flip side, indie is 10 times more harder because you're kind of working with, you know, stones and sticks, trying to get this company going, and you're
Right.
wearing many different hats, but you have more control over the project because it's less money. I think
Okay.
it, like a indie style of filmmaking, also isn't super sustainable unless you keep on working like in not so shitty budgets. And no offense to like the super ultra low budget projects, I think they do great, but unfortunately Vancouver and BC just isn't super friendly to that model because we're so used to these big union shows working
Mm-hmm.
that you don't get discounts if you're an indie show. You know, like the city isn't super sympathetic and understanding of indie. Permits don't really change. Permits are the same that they may charge for like
right. And they're all designed to take money from the big productions.
Exactly. So you are in that fight constantly in an indie show. I think it has really cool things because you can actually do things for a lot simpler. You don't have to like go into those union labor laws and stuff like that you have to worry about. But on the flip side, I think there's both ends to it. Union producers, I think, may have a different perspective. I don't really produce in the union world. I've worked plenty and I know a lot of producers that produce union style, but it's also like 10 times harder to get that project greenlit in the union world than it might be in the indie world, because in the indie world you have a small team, you can pivot constantly.
Yeah, I mean that's definitely one of the strengths of being a small startup over being like
totally.
Facebook too.
And on the other hand, for an indie, the battle starts, okay, how do we sell this project? How do we distribute it? For the union side, there's distribution deals in place. Studio's going to take it, package it, send it out, kind of thing.
Right, that whole thing is already taken care of kind of before the show even starts filming.
And yeah, totally. And I find that a lot where people that have only specifically worked in the union world actually find it harder to adapt in the indie side than people on the indie side might. Interesting.
Would you say that it takes more creativity to work on the union or in the indie side than the union world, just because there's more strings, there's more hoops, like you have to follow union rules, so it feels like you kind of get more leeway to try new things and to experiment in the indie world?
Yeah, I think the one analogy I would use is in a union thing, you are in this like cute little cocoon where you have the freedom to do what you're doing. You're making a nice check. Sure, you're working long hours, all of us do, but you're protected. There's usually different cogs. There's a military order that's very well defined that's managing it. On the indie side, you don't have that protection. So it's like if I mess up, I'm going to actually essentially impact this project, which actually is a sizable down payment for a home in Langley. And you know, I'm basically gonna be on the edge of my sword kind of thing. On the union world, you're protected. So a lot of people I find that we bring to indie side, even in commercials and stuff, I do see there's like a sense of struggle. They don't know how to adapt. Maybe the vendor contracts haven't been like, because I think this industry is all about who you know in every stage.
Absolutely. Film is 100% nepotism.
Yeah. So I think people do struggle in that sense. Obviously, with the younger generations, it's starting to become very different than what the world was even when I was like fully starting out. Now I see there's a little bit more adaptability there. But yeah, I definitely think like someone from an indie side that jumps into the union world is actually able to function a little better than people.
I feel like I've had a bit of firsthand experience in that, like not for myself, because honestly most of my shows have been union. I've been in some regards lucky in that sense, because there are certain aspects of union shows that are definitely cushier. But I've done a few days here and there on indie shows and indie movies, and I know a bunch of people that work almost exclusively on indie.
Right.
And it just like, As much as the film industry seems like a different world from the regular world, indie land versus Union Nation, they also seem like two entirely different worlds.
and I love working union too. I mean, who doesn't love a good paycheck coming out? You know, you got your benefits covered and stuff. The only thing,
crafty and better catering.
Yeah, the only thing is, I think just the landscape we are in Canadian filmmaking is like you have to go indie because unfortunately we are a service sector, not just for film. Most industries in Canada are dominated service sectors. Mm-hmm. So the question is, okay, do you move to LA to get because who doesn't like working with more money? But it's just hard, you know.
That's
so
definitely a big hang up for startups in Vancouver too. Like when I was starting the previous company, Xenia Technologies, like we were fresh out of university and we landed all of the like young entrepreneur grants and funding that we could, kind of thing. We won a bunch of competitions and applied for accelerators and stuff in Canada and internationally. And one major thing that was just always a huge like speed bump / annoyance to us was the funding in Canada is just not there. Like there's pennies on the dollar compared to the amount of funding that they just like throw at random nobodies in the States for like a half-baked idea. Like
totally.
Like our company ended up getting into an accelerator program called Hacks that focuses on hardware development.
Okay.
And they invest in you and send you to their offices in Shenzhen, China to do like hardware development. So you're like right there at the epicenter of electronics manufacturing. So you can build out your supply chains and make partnerships and whatnot. And then from there, they send you to San Francisco to meet investors and try and fundraise. So I spent 5 months in each of them. And like in San Francisco, there would be like the 30-second pizza delivery app that is like almost exactly the same as every other pizza delivery app and also not really different than like Uber Eats, which was already huge at the time. But things that were actually new and novel or things that like actually had a unique concept behind them, like people would avoid it because there was so much herd mentality, right? Like it's all groupthink in those areas. As much as a lot of those investors want to be like the next big thing or like the new hot investor that like found the next Facebook or whatever, most of them are actually just like the 50th dude that invested in another pizza delivery app.
Right. No, totally. I mean, and on your, based off of your point, it was we have a really talented producer in town. Their name is Sean Williamson, and they once said that best, and I really agree with it. I think a lot of it can be said for most things in Canada, like our creative industry at least. We're in this weird little bubble where we think making something cheaper and simpler is the way to go. But he said it best. We should be looking at how do we make it the best quality we can. Mm-hmm. So rather than a project being cheaper and simpler, okay, how can the story be the best story it can? And that's where we struggle, I think, where, we just did our second feature, and when I was interviewing for department heads, I started realizing a lot of department heads in the province are all about cheaper, faster, simpler, but not enough were pitching themselves as like, I have a vision for this. On the other flip side, because I also work in VFX land, on the union shows, I realize some of the best HODs or best professionals that we work with are oftentimes quality individuals. So their focus isn't just simpler and cheaper, because that will come. You take a complex idea, you can trying to break it down with the proper schedule, proper team, but their focus would be, how can we make this a quality product? And I think that is something,
Yeah, that is absolutely the difference maker. Like there's, myself and Adam on the first episode had touched on Steve Jobs and how so many, especially these days, modern like investors and business people, they look at Steve Jobs and they think that what he did so well was being a controlling asshole that just like had a firm grip on every aspect of the company and ruled it with an iron fist. But that's not at all what made Steve Jobs great was that he cared about one thing, and it was making the best product that he could for the end user.
Yeah.
And like that's very much a mentality that not enough creators, whether they be entrepreneurs or musicians or producers, just not enough people have that mentality. And I noticed, like, especially in Canada, like you said, I find that interesting when you said that, because it very much is a Canadian mentality that, like, our value proposition is to do things cheaper than the States. And that's how we get American contracts. Their dollar goes further up here. They get better tax breaks or whatever kind of thing, right? Whereas if you go to America, that's not at all how they're thinking. They're thinking like, I'm going to be the next Spielberg. I'm going to make the next greatest movie. I'm going to make the next biggest tech company. And just that matter of belief in the vision, the idea, and the process, like, it makes a huge difference compared to simply selling your talents and skills for whoever is going to pay you like a fair wage, but like you're still trying to undercut all of your competition, which means you're probably taking less than you're worth. But just because there's a scarcity mindset around it, they are like, everyone is jonesing to take that tiny little hit of like, yeah, I'll take your micro funding for this project, when if I had proper funding like that shitty American movie did, then I could have made something that was actually amazing.
Yeah, I mean, and I think a lot of it falls down to patience and, you know, taking your time with something. I think too many people get excited about something and they're like, let me go put it out in the world, or let me start assembling a team. And before you know it,
assemble the team.
Yeah, because I always think like when an idea is in your head, you're the only one sitting with it. Maybe your best friend is there, or someone you really trust is there. That's okay. The moment you start assembling a team, it's not your project anymore, because everyone that comes on the team oftentimes has their own life things going on. They recognize, maybe I'm talking in film terms for now. It's you know, they're coming on, they want to know what the schedule is of this thing. They have their own life stuff going on. I think time is the single most important thing any one of us have. And I always say it's not your project anymore, because now there's 7 other stakeholders on this. And in indie land and union land, both, time is money. And as soon as these people come on board, maybe there's even a little bit of financing in place, boom, now you're like, you got to run. Because in film especially, like the most creative people are oftentimes the most under the gun as well, because we want to make the project fast, we want to keep it going, you know, you want to put it out into the world. So I always say development is the most fun you'll have with that project, because you can sit down, harness the story as much as you want. You can make it simpler later, but right now, stay with the story and focus on what is the quality of this thing that I'm going to put out.
Yeah, immerse yourself into the creative aspects, because those are the parts that are going to bring you the most joy. Because afterwards, like you said, when you bring the team on, you guys, all of a sudden, it has gone from a jog to a sprint.
Yeah.
And now, instead of having time to sit back and enjoy the process, you have a lot of things on your mind all the time.
Totally. And I think one part of producing is with you and the director, it's like a relationship. I'm not even like, in many ways, it's like a romantic relationship, but in a work relationship. Like it's like dating, finding a good director to work with. But too many times I've sat down with directors where they're like, if only I like fleshed this portion out more. And that is when you're like, okay, why didn't you then? You know, sure, maybe they're like, I just got the financing, we got the money in place, we got this, we got that, and then it's like, okay, but and on the flip end, it's like you can keep refining a project as much as you want. Sometimes you just need to put it out. I totally understand that, but I'm talking like on the grand scheme of things, like for a story to really work, to make sense, because on the other side, the more talented directors or creatives I've worked with, they have things fleshed out so properly that you just know this person's prepared, because in their head, they've made this movie 5 times.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the best example I could possibly think of for that is Christopher Nolan.
Right.
Like,
right.
How long do you think it took him to iron out all of the kinks for a movie like Tenet? Like, you literally have to watch a 3-hour video after watching Tenet, having someone explain to you what the temporal pincer thing is to understand how that movie works. But he did it all in his head before he wrote it down. And he kept track of it. And then, like, I'm curious how much he had to, like, how much he could track in his head versus how much he had to, like, keep writing down and re-scripting as he was going. I would love to pick his brain about his process. That would be a fascinating conversation, especially as someone who likes to write myself.
Maybe next year, you never know. But the point is, and on that note too, taking his example, Inception was a movie, I think it was probably one of the first projects he thought of, because I've seen his interviews, but he saved it. And funny enough, when Dark Knight was getting made, that was the deal, I believe, that was made, that he'll get to make Inception if he makes Dark Knight.
I think I've heard about that, yeah.
But my point that I tell a lot of first up-and-coming directors, writers, that script that you want to make, don't let it be your first project. Make it your second or third project.
Oh, that's such a good
tip. So save it away, because do you really want to get a lump sum beer can money to go make that project that you've been dreaming, fantasizing about for 6-7 years? Or do you want to make a project where you're like, these are the resources I have in my hand. Maybe I have my friend's house. Maybe I have, I don't know, 50 grand or whatever Christmas money I saved up for all these years. These are the resources I have in hand.
I wish I had 50 grand in Christmas money.
Yeah, man. Yeah. And neither do I. But my point is, you pull down your resources, and that's when the real creativity comes. These are the resources I have in my hand. What's an amazing story I can tell with these resources? So let that be your first project. Let that be your calling card. And then, try and get towards the ladder to make that third, fourth project, because that's when you strike, when you have the money, you have the things in place. Anyone can make a great movie when they have 50 million, but the trick is how do you make
unless you're Phase 4 Marvel.
No comment. But the trick is how do you make that first little piece? Maybe it's music, theater, play, I don't know, a t-shirt. When you have limited resources, how do you make that happen? And I think that's where the real creativity comes.
Absolutely, and necessity is the mother of invention.
Yeah.
That's actually a perfect segue for me to lead you back into one of the most important questions I'm going to ask every guest on this show. What does creativity mean to you?
I think creativity is a direct replication of the people that surround you in that specific phase of your life. Because
interesting perspective. Can you dive into that, please?
Yeah, I think it kind of goes back to something my grandpa sometimes used to say to me, and it's something I recently read back. And I was talking to my parents about it, funny enough. It was at the end of your life when you're 85, 87, 90, maybe 100, you're like a mosaic of everyone you've ever loved or spent time with. Mm-hmm. I think creativity actually has a lot to do with the people you surround yourself in those moments, because those people bring you their stories, those people bring you their ideas, and that meshes with your own thoughts and your own situations, and I think that creates something really cool. So I'm saying I could come up with an idea based off of a random conversation I had with a stranger two years ago in the SkyTrain. Because
I've come up with many ideas based on similarly loose things like that.
And similarly, it's like your coworkers that you're working with. Maybe your coworkers were going through a situation that sparked a certain conversation that gave you an idea, and you were like, holy shit, this could be pretty cool. Maybe it's a song. Maybe it's a first heartbreak. Maybe it's that first date that went wrong. Maybe it's that conversation that your boss had with you in a bathroom cubicle, or something, funny, interesting like that. Maybe it's that conversation your dad had with you while having that first sip of coffee on a Sunday morning that you were just like, this could be something cool. So I think that's, for me, what creativity means.
That's super interesting, because there's a very common notion that we are the average of the 5 or 6 people we spend the most time with, and this is very much more in-depth kind of, I guess, belief in that sense. I hadn't really considered creativity from that perspective before, but you're definitely absolutely right. Like the more creative people I spend time with, the more creative my ideas become. And like an aspect of this, like one of my kind of foundational beliefs is this. I mean, it's called many different things on the internet. One of them is like the law of polarity or the law of duality kind of thing. And the idea being that like on this side of reality, everything requires two sides, right? Like there is always a heads and a tails. There's always a positive and a negative. There's always an action and a reaction. So if you are an isolated unit that isn't interacting with anyone, then how creative can your ideas be, or how creative can your like content or creations projects be? Which is, I mean, there's definitely a way that we could study that, but it would require like making someone live in isolation for 50 years.
Yeah. If the lockdown was like, an overdrive going on for 2-3 years, like one of those post-apocalyptic movies, maybe we could study that more.
Yeah. So thinking about that, what were some of the biggest creative influences in your life, especially with regards to helping you like make the leap to try and be a producer? Like I know tons of people think about wanting to be in the film industry, or like wanting to be on screen, wanting to be a musician, wanting to be a writer or producer or whatever have you, right? And a lot of people have a hard time taking that leap of faith, having a hard time essentially, like, even if we have a safety net underneath us, it's terrifying to like jump off that ledge and not know if you're going to fly or if something's going to catch you or if you're just going to land flat on your face.
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. I think for me, as far as, I mean, I've been really close to my grandpa. I was very close to him. He had a very interesting life. This guy basically came from Pakistan, and he moved to India during the partition. So he's seen like the worst things a human being can ever possibly see. He used to tell me these crazy stories about his life, about things. I spent a lot of time with him. We would go on these like long ass walks, I remember. And I think somewhere down there, this whole part of these stories, because I think stories are what makes us as human beings. I think all of us carry within us like a million stories of going back to creativity, of the people we met and the encounters we had and the situations we were part of. And I think stories are what bonds us together, because
100% agree.
I think
I'm all about stories.
Yeah, and I think that's why I'm in this industry too, because I think going back to religion or history or whatever, the stories, the themes are the same, but we just like pad it up with different things. Like a Captain America versus Thanos' entire army story. Like all of us love that. It's been told since biblical
Classic
times.
David and Goliath, yeah.
But yeah, that's where it all started for me. Like I think I was super close to him, and I think one thing he always said was just be the best at something, even if like it doesn't matter what people tell you, but if you really love something, just try and be the best. Just try your best to be the best. It doesn't mean you have to be like, I don't know, freaking Einstein level or Steve Jobs level, but just give it a shot. And I think for me, I think too many people go through life with too many regrets. That's just a promise I made
Very
to
much.
myself, is I don't want that bill from regret 50 years from now. So in this moment, I'm just going to give it my best shot. I'm going to do what I'm thinking. And I think for me, that's what film was. I was like, I might fall flat on my face, but I don't want that bill from regret when I'm sitting in that bar of lost hope. I want it to be the opposite. I want it to be like, at least I gave it a shot, So I think there's like a great quote. It's like, too many men live in shadows of quiet desperation. And I think that is just an analogy I use in my life. Whatever happens, I'm just not gonna, live in a life of regret, I think. So that's why I do what I do in film. And I didn't really have a godfather or anything starting out in this industry. So far, I can't see any wood here, but touch wood, where everything's gone okay-ish. So I totally understand what you're saying with so many people have that fear, but I think, I don't know if there's another life. I don't know if there's an afterlife. I just think we have now and might as well give it a shot, you know?
I think even if there is an afterlife, like kind of briefly touching on that DMT breakthrough again, like before that happened, I didn't believe in afterlife.
Mm-hmm.
After it happened, I believe that afterlife is the main life.
Right.
But that experience gave me the most profound appreciation for the time that I have on this planet
Mm-hmm.
in a way that I didn't appreciate before. And like until that moment, I spent a lot of my time just kind of wasting it, right? Like going back to what you said about living a life of regrets, I feel like I have a very similar motivation.
Mm-hmm.
And that was kind of one of the things that I took away from that experience, is that if I get to a point where I'm 90 years old, am I going to feel bad that I got rejected by some girl that said no when I asked her out? Or
Right.
am I going to feel bad that my company failed? Or hell, am I even going to be sad if I had to declare bankruptcy? Or am I going to be more sad if I didn't try?
Yeah.
If I didn't do the thing that had been burning inside of me since I was a child, that's like that voice inside screaming like, there's something for you to do. Like there's a magnum opus for you to paint, go work. And the more I would avoid that inner voice, the more like depressed or upset I would be. Whereas like when I got to the point where I just embraced it and said, you know what does it matter if I get rejected?
Yeah.
What does it matter if I have to declare bankruptcy? Money is made up anyway. Like
No, totally. And that goes back to that, like an analogy too. Like my grandpa like would say there's nothing more sadder than finding that super attractive person across the bar. You make eye contact with them all throughout the night. You just never have the nerve to go talk to them. And sure, some people might romanticize being like, that was so perfect. But there's a deep part of you that was like, what if?
Mm-hmm.
But
Absolutely.
And that's what I think goes with every single thing. What if you applied for that job? What if you like get sent that pitch package? What if you sent that script to someone? Or what if you just gave it a shot? Because I think it ties back to what we were earlier talking about. You can only, like Steve Jobs would say, you can only look back and connect the dots. And afterlife, no afterlife, whatever's out there, I think I am a spiritual person. I think there are things that maybe guide us. And I think manifestation is a real thing. I've seen my mom like show me that more times than I can count. And I think, but the only way it's fueled, in my opinion, is if you give it that first push. You know, you just be open to those opportunities around you.
Absolutely. You have to be willing to take the step. Like,
Yeah.
Even if life has paved the path for you, you still have to walk it.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like each situation is going to like teach us more things. And I think that is what producing is with a project, because I find too many people are constantly dwelling in the past with projects or things or situations that are like, this is not going to work out. You talk to your friends and you're like, I have a project. This is the budget. And automatically the first reaction is, that's not too much. This is not going to work. Maybe it won't work, but hey, this is what the hands I've been dealt with. How can we take this, move forward? And with producing too, I always tell producers, you're like, if nothing else, be the momentum for your team. And keep unlocking those doors, keep tapping on those opportunities, and just keep giving it a shot every day, because too many projects lose momentum, and that's how they just burn to the ground. So I think in my life, for the 10 projects that may have produced in like 5 years, there's like 45 projects that never even saw the light of day because they lost momentum, financing, whatever. But every day I need to at least give it that one push. And that also goes back to another point I heard someone in film school say, and I think you might be able to relate to that with tech startups, is like, you know, you go to these movies where the crew is just constantly complaining, oh, it's a shitty little movie, the food isn't that good. But like my film school teacher used to say, there's a producer that worked so hard for it for like 10 years, and this is their project.
Absolutely.
So have that, you know, for tech startups too, I think, right?
That's actually a very interesting point that you raise, because that is something that is so common on set, is having the crew complain about catering or like crafty. And it's like, my perspective of that coming into film, especially coming to it from like a meagerly funded startup, like, yeah, we got some investment. We had money. We weren't like starving by any means, but like we weren't having like 4-star meals catered to us every day. And like I start in film and I get this catering truck, and to top it off, even like my first production, Motherland, even though the show was an absolute nightmare to work on, like me working on the last month of Motherland made me one of the most senior people on the team, because by the end of the first 7 months, they had cycled through almost an entire crew.
Wow.
And pretty much the only people that were left were department heads.
Yeah.
And still, even like, so that catering truck, absolutely phenomenal. I think it was Tivoli's Catering or something like that.
Shout out.
Yeah, you guys make amazing food. And like the whole time I was just like, wow, this food is so good. It's like, it's always fresh. Like every day it's a new like selection of items on the menu kind of thing. And then after a month of being in the film industry, all of a sudden, every person that I talk to about lunch, they're like, oh man, it's just this again. Or, oh, it's like, their food isn't that good. Or like, oh, this is kind of blah, or that kind of thing, right? And then so many people will like go and get McDonald's or like some kind of fast food. And like, they provide you with probably up to $40-$50 a day worth of food if you eat it. And so many people will, instead of taking that free food, complain about that free food and then go eat like almost basically plastic.
Yeah. It's and I mean, not to say another quote, but it's like Oliver Twist had this quote about what it even means when he says grass is greener, and it was just like, human beings, if they get exactly what they want, will never be happy with it. And
absolutely.
I think, and to the other part of the crew, I think if they're working so hard, I think they do deserve a good meal. On that side of what you're saying, I think it's, as a producer, I always say, like, isn't it still pretty cool though, no matter what set you're on, at least the ones I've seen, big budget, high budget, low budget, ultra low budget, shit can budget, they still strive to at least give you a cup of coffee, or there's something on the crafty table.
Yeah, they want people to be fed to some degree.
They are trying. That's what I say. It's not, whatever happened with the project, at least they're trying their best to feed you something. I've never, thankfully, been on a project where they didn't even have money for a crafty. But even the school projects we've made in film school and high school, there was always something. And I think that exactly, like the first thing I talk to people who've never been on set, which kind of makes me a little excited, where they're like, oh my God, crafty or catering. And you're like, okay, cool. Life isn't that bad. You know, we're not in a war zone. It feels like it, but we're not. We're not saving lives. We're fucking freaking making cartoons or whatever.
Yeah, someone, one of my ALMs once told, actually Adam, our host of The Deficit, when he was stressing out one day, that at the end of it all, film is one giant game of make-believe.
Yeah.
And none of it actually matters at the end of the day. So as worked up as people get and as stressed out as they get, by tomorrow or by next week or by the end of the show, literally none of it matters.
Yeah. And yeah, like I think all of us, like, you know, I think it's a fitting analogy. We all ran away from home to join the circus. That's it. That's why all of us do what we do. I think if the world stopped making movies and TV for like 1 year, we'll actually have a lot of money to solve some of the global issues in the world and still have left a little more.
It's actually interesting you say that, because we kind of are coming up on, well, like we're short of a year, but we're around like 8 months of, at least in our area and America, it has been pretty much 8 months of not filming anything because of the writer strike and the actor strike. And like, from your perspective as a producer, how has that affected the industry?
Yeah, I think on the personal front, I've had a lot of my good friends being laid off. There's like definitely that level of concern. I've was thankfully lucky enough to sustain myself with commercials and stuff, but I think from my point of view with producing, you do need to be quite adaptable because gone are the days where you could just make film and TV and sustain yourself. Even the top producers, I mean, I think the producer of X and Pearl was just talking about that. Like, they've been working in the industry for, I think, almost like 25 years, but they still make commercials on the side and they still make movies. So I think the budgets are decreasing, competition is there. I think filmmaking at its heart has always been about adaptability. And I think the strike showed me that. I think on the other side too, I don't remember who gave that speech, but they just said like, and this happened when we were going in a global recession, I think in the 2000s with real estate and the American market collapsing. They basically said that this will affect film too, but film is often about patience as much as it's about adaptability. So that was just very key for me in the strike, where it was just like, just be patient, just chill.
I find that so interesting that you say that, because when you are on set, there is absolutely zero patience.
Yeah. Yeah, and but that's what I mean. It's like when you got the money, then it's like all about go. But on the flip side of the things, as a film worker, because I'm a producer, but I'm a film worker, I'm a contractor, I'm a freelancer. I have the same problems that many people do. So a lot of it is for a lot of us just like, how do I sustain myself like when I don't have work? And I think the key is when you do have work, be conscious of that. I don't have kids or anything. I know it's very different for people with families, mortgages, all that fun stuff. But I think that the key is, though, when you do have that influx of projects coming up, save, budget.
Prepare for the downtime, because there will be downtime.
And there always is. And I think the other thing with this industry is we all knew this was going to happen. For like 10 years, we've all been talking about this. So when it hit, luckily for the veterans, it wasn't that big of a shock. I think on the flip side, there were a lot of people that view the union side of filmmaking as a way to make quick bucks, get out. And they were, I think, more shocked, because I heard people being like, holy shit, what is happening? The sky is falling. And
yeah, I know that's definitely some of my friends. Like, I know probably at least half a dozen people that were like really banking on the industry being like thick and busy.
Yeah.
Or at least like their idea was to save, but their idea was that they would save over a couple of years, and like they came to a point where that was cut short like way faster than they were expecting. And
totally.
Even my barber, honestly, last week was telling me he's got a bunch of clients that work in film, and like almost all of them have had to find work in other industries because none of them can, like, 8 months off is a long time to be without wage.
Totally. And even not just us. I was talking to one of the producers that worked on The Boys, and she was just telling me that she hasn't seen like a dime of work. So she's just been hanging tight. Because the other thing is, writers, producers, and what this strike was about was they don't actually make as much money as we think they do, because inflation is at an all-time high. What I said back, like with filmmaking and as a whole, wages actually haven't gone up to combat that. So we've actually, because the only reason why we make all these great checks is because we work long ass hours.
So long. Yes,
If
you're literally trading your time for money.
Exactly. And that's why everything, I guess, kind of is tied. That's why I wanted to go in producing, because time is something I was just like, as of the essence here. And I think that's the other thing. Wages weren't going up. That's why the strike happened. But for us people in Canada, at least, we need to recognize that, like, especially in Vancouver, we think of film as a normal thing, but it's not actually normal. Like, most countries don't actually even have a film industry.
Yeah, or such a small one that, like, basically our commercials are their feature films.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's like, I think that's something to keep in mind too, is like a lot of people were like, oh my God, why is this happening? And they were just like this and that. But I'm like, okay, well, all of us, they'll like need to know this, like, is actually the norm in most countries. Like provinces, Nova Scotia has like maybe one movie that gets shot there once a year. Most people there that work on those shows work on a tugboat half the time. So
it's not a lot of, I guess, yeah. There's some pretty gorgeous scenery over there. I'm surprised that they don't
Totally.
film
I
more
mean,
over there.
Peter Pan
honestly.
shot there, I think, or no, it was Newfoundland. But yeah, I mean, if it were up to me, I'd be filming down there. Like
The same Peter Pan that filmed here, so, like they filmed here and then moved over there.
Yeah, they went there for a bit. Yeah, Newfoundland. Yeah.
That kind of thing always blows me away. Like, is it actually cheaper to film half of your movie here and half of it there? Like, I worked on Brand New Cherry Flavor, and they did that for the last episode. They did like 6 months of work here, and then they did the last week of shooting in LA.
Yeah.
And I know, like, Shogun, a Disney production that is like notorious in the Lower Mainland for going over budget, like the most over budget any show has ever gone. And they were talking about moving the entire show to Japan for the second season. And like
Right.
they have millions of dollars worth of sets and props and costumes and stuff here. Like, are they going to ship it all over? Can they ship it all over? Is that cheaper than rebuilding it over there? Like,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I always think like the creative mindset and the financial mindset and the business mindset, when like the creatives can talk all they want sometimes, and you can be like, sure, we'll ship that over. Sure, this will happen. But this business is all just about how much money did we put in, how much money did we bring back. So for any business venture, if they're like, we didn't make that much money, then it's like, guess what? Japan, Vancouver, you're not even having a season 2. So
that's true. Yeah, a lot of shows just get canceled out of the blue, even if they thought they were going to have a second season.
yeah, and I think that's where the streaming model has changed everything, because they don't actually show you numbers anymore as much. So
Yeah, I've read some stuff about Netflix being like a particularly bad propagator of that. Is that they don't give a lot of the filmmakers the stats on their shows, and they will also like just out of the blue cancel a show that had been going for 1 or 2 seasons that was popular, but for some reason someone decided that it doesn't get another season.
yeah,
Even though it was popular and it would have been watched. Sometimes it even ends on a cliffhanger, and after they had already told the world there was going to be another season, they were like, actually no, we're taking it back.
yeah, and I've honestly, that's the kind of stuff of like voodoo magic. I don't even know what the analytics go on the back end, but it's an interesting industry though, because we're the only industry where it's the norm. As soon as you tell someone about your project, they're like, what's the budget? Like, my point is, do I go to Starbucks and am I like, what's the budget of this coffee? Break it down for me.
Yeah.
So like, we are the only industry that makes it a norm to constantly ask you, tell me how much it costs to make this project right now. Like, I could talk to my bartender at a bar and he'll be like, what's the budget? So I guess all I'm trying to say is like, with analytics and all that fun stuff, just because I guess it has been the norm doesn't mean it's it needs to be a thing, because other industries don't do it. So I think that's where the influx of tech and the entertainment business has been really interesting for me to watch, because I think our industry is kind of realizing that, okay, there's actually a larger thing at play with marketing, with tech, and for producers too, like me, I'm constantly having to educate myself. Okay, having AI, having VFX, like make these leaps and bounds, like how is that going to impact our industry in the next 10, 15 years?
Oh, absolutely profoundly, especially if I have anything to say about it.
Yeah, because you're from tech. Like, how's your experience been, like, seeing the evolution of, like, everything, I guess, in the last 5-7 years?
It's actually, like, I mean, I've only been in film since 2019, so I can't really speak about some of the changes from prior to that, but something that I can definitely say that I noticed almost immediately coming into film is that a lot of the technology that was used and a lot of the methodologies that are used in film are things that the rest of the world decided were antiquated like 15 years ago or more, right? Like, when I started working in film, like huge giant light setups were still the absolute norm, where you would need like 4 guys to lift this huge light up sometimes, kind of deal. And only after the COVID shutdown did they start to implement like high-powered LED lights that could be less than a quarter of the size and put out more light than that big light. And there are some differences in like the feel of the lighting, which is like all the hard work. So all the hard work of the grips and the LX department shaping the lights and whatnot. But you can do so much with LED panels.
Yeah.
Like you have so much control over them, and you can control them all wirelessly from a single source, right? So why do you need 20 crew spread out around the set, each manning these giant lights, when you can have like 20 light stands? And that makes it way more affordable for indie projects, because now you don't have to pay 20 hours worth of people for like a 5-minute shot.
Yeah.
And like the software that they use, which is actually like, that is one of Omnia Theater's projects that we're working on, is like, I'm building a suite of tools for creators, especially indie and like individual creators, to help make their projects come to life.
Oh, wow.
And I'm doing it like mostly because I have projects that I want to come to life, and I can't afford a $500,000 budget to like turn my book into an animated series, right? But with the power of AI tools, I can absolutely do it for like $50,000, which is much more achievable.
Yeah.
And like, if I have these tools that I can use to make my own content like that, other people are going to want to use them. And it would also like hugely open up the doors for, like, one of the issues that I've had with the film and entertainment industry for a long time is that it is gate kept by people with money. Like, you have to find someone with money to have a budget to make your thing, right? And whether that's music or a feature film or a show or a short, or even if you're like a painter or something, right? Or like a novelist, where do you get the money to survive and sustain yourself until the point where you can actually release your content and start making money off of it? But there's all kinds of like little intermediary steps that you can take, especially with the proliferation of social media and podcasting, YouTube kind of things, where indie creators can rely more on community to support them, rather than having to find one person with money who actually believes in it, where everyone knows people with money don't like letting go of their money. People with money tend to be incredibly frugal with how they spend their money. Totally.
And I think that's what's happening right now too, with like a lot of cool filmmakers, because the topic of distribution is, I think, not talked about as much, because everyone, like, raising money and selling something, I always say, are the hardest things you can ever do in this industry.
100%.
So if you're, as a filmmaker, producer, those areas, if you can just figure that out, you'll be like Houdini or like a magician. And I think we're in this like very interesting place where I'm seeing more people self-distribute than ever before. And I think comedians are a big thing, but even in our day-to-day, what you basically said is, with NFTs and all that fun stuff, it's becoming like a thing where I've seen channels basically make their own content and distribute it, and basically make that subscription model a thing where you can subscribe to them and get those things. And it's very interesting to me, because I feel like we're on the cusp of either a new revolution or something very interesting is happening after COVID now, where we're like, holy shit, I don't actually need to rely on the big guy to get my things out there, you know?
A lot of people decided that it was better to work for themselves. You end up working less hard for yourself than working for someone else. Because usually when you're working for someone else, not only do you have all the stresses of your job that they have dumped on you, but you're also carrying their stress. Because whenever they're stressed out, they put it on you. They make you work harder. They yell at you. They put more on your plate. Or like, if they're growing too fast, they don't hire properly. They don't train new people properly. And like, if you're working for yourself, you might also be doing all of those things, but you're also getting all of the benefit from it when it works out. Whereas like, if you go and work for Google, you are making someone else rich. Yeah. You're not making yourself rich. And all of that stress that you get, like, sure, you don't have the stress of like knowing when your next paycheck is going to be, because there's a consistent paycheck coming in, but you have all of these other organizational stresses breathing down the back of your neck. Whereas if you are like self-sustainable, you're working for yourself, you get to live a much more free life, in the sense that like, when you are doing what you love, time just flies by. Like, you don't realize that you've spent 10 hours working on something, because to you it felt like an hour.
Right. And yeah, and I know you mentioned that thing about the stress thing. I'd be curious to hear your perspective because, I mean, entrepreneurs, producers, it's the same kind of deal. Like how do you combat with stress on a daily basis with that? Because we're essentially in the same boat. I think like you're making a new company, you're making a new film production. So like, what is something that you use to like combat that on a daily basis?
One of the biggest things is, and as cliche as it sounds, but physical activity.
Okay.
And I don't just mean that as like I'm not the Joe Rogan thing where I go and do an insane workout and make myself puke, but just like if I'm cooped up in the house, I know that will start to affect like my mental health to some degree, right? So I make a point of trying to get out and go for a walk in nature, in trees, like at least a few times a week. I try and go do the Coquitlam Crunch a couple times a week.
Yeah.
Especially if I haven't been getting to the gym. A massive life changer for me was over this last summer, I was in Mexico for a couple weeks, and a friend of mine had just happened to suggest a book to me right as I was finishing my last book, and it's called Breath, The New Science of a Lost Art by James Nestor.
Okay.
And it completely changed the way I think about breathing. Basically, human beings have been breathing incorrectly for like basically since the dawn of group civilization, like at least European Western group civilization. And this book kind of walks you through all of the different cultures throughout history that have kind of been aware of this truth of like how important it is to breathe properly. And like one of the main things that he says is in almost every circumstance, you should never inhale through your mouth. You should always inhale through your nose. And even just doing that, you will notice a difference in how like much energy you have and how fast your body recovers from things. Because your nose was the organ that was designed for breathing. Like it filters 3 different ways that your mouth doesn't filter when you're inhaling air. So after reading that, I've taken to doing a lot of breath work and integrating that into my meditation. And that has been hugely helpful for dealing with stress and mental health. Like when you like get into the focused breathing zones, it just like, I don't know, it does something to your concentration and your focus. Like everything that was such like heavy weight on your mind, it just like starts to dissolve into the background of your mind. And like honestly, I've even noticed like new muscle definition just from doing breathing exercises. Like because part of it is to do like a full proper exhale where you're like really using all of your core muscles. And it's like just from breathing, it has thinned out the fat in my core section. And another big one for me is writing, especially like both journaling and creative writing. I'm a hobby novelist, so like I have a manuscript for a first novel that I finished. I'm writing the sequel for it. And even though it's fantasy and it's a sci-fi fantasy, the amount of stuff that I learned for starters, and more importantly, the amount of stuff I learned about myself and my inner thoughts, the way that my mind works, just from writing a fictional story, because like you don't understand the connections that your brain makes necessarily unless you spend a lot of time thinking about them. And that's something not a lot of people do in today's society where we surround ourselves with distractions all the time.
Yeah, no, totally. And I mean, like I started journaling last year, I think. It like really helps you because I don't know what it is, but it's almost like every single thing you want to talk to someone, you can pen down. So you're releasing that energy still, but there's like a deep intimacy you have because I think we're in such an interesting time because people get outraged so quickly, and I find a lot of people don't want to hear each other's opinions. Where I find most of us are doing these interesting things where we're either journaling. I have a friend, for example, that talks to himself, like records himself. That's his way of journaling.
I have a friend that does that too.
And for me, it's just like a funny little commonality that I'm seeing in a lot of people where I'm like realizing most people don't really feel free with anyone else. Therefore, they are journaling so much. And I find
That's a very interesting point.
yeah, like I started taking therapy recently and stuff, and it's been a life changer for me. And that was something I was talking to my therapist about, what I feel when I journal, and I feel not judged, and I can be super open and intimate.
Mhm.
But the fact I'm like putting something down on paper is like an energy release. So you do feel
100%.
lighter after that, and I wonder if it's becoming some sort of a societal thing where most of us are trying to do these things because we just don't feel comfortable or open, or we feel like we're wearing like this funny little mask all day.
I definitely think, like, as people, we are always wearing masks.
Yeah.
I had a friend that's recently started taking acting classes. She's trying to break into acting. She's actually going to be on a podcast recording tomorrow.
Oh, nice.
She works in set deck, and her last show she was working as a set deck coordinator. But she was telling me from her acting class that one of the most like crucial pieces of advice that they gave her in the acting class was the difference between good actors and bad actors is that good actors realize that people are acting all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And when you realize that, it gives you a power over choosing how you are acting.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, like, a bad actor is constantly fixated on trying to change their personality to be the personality that they want to convey. Whereas, like, an actor that understands that everyone is acting all the time, they're not trying to change the personality that they currently have to be this other personality. They are literally embracing the emotion
Mm-hmm.
of that role, and instead of acting it, they are responding as if that was happening to them.
Yeah. No, that's so interesting. And like, the funny little thing is, because I work in VFX and I also work in animation, one of the things in animation is you film a visual reference. And what that is, you're essentially how a person is emotionally and how they're portraying themselves. You refer that to an animated character.
Okay.
So the nuances of human emotion, like little eye twitches,
Right.
facial
The
movements,
micro-expressions.
they notice all that.
Mhm.
And what I realized after spending a lot of time on this show, which was very heavy on animation, is all of us have these like little unique little things we do. For an actor translates to visual expression, but we are in a sense wearing these interesting little masks because we're all trying to convey these things through our facial expressions, through our just body languages, and it's so I was just like thinking about that.
Right,
If you talk about a mask, it is very interesting because most of us are maybe trying to hide the craziness that's in us, or we're not expressing ourselves. And maybe when it comes to journaling and stuff, it's like that mask, those little movements and things we're like trying to hide all day does come out in some form or another, and you're like, holy shit, okay, this is all like the word vomit or brain spaghetti I needed to like get out.
Yeah. And I think definitely, like, for me, something that ends up happening when I journal a lot is the masks kind of talk to each other. And I think that was eventually kind of what translated into me eventually writing a book, was that I noticed that all of these masks interacting with each other, like, they had so much depth in and of themselves when I started exploring them that they could be characters on their own.
Right.
And, like, just from understanding that, I realized that I could build like universes worth of characters just out of like my experience of interacting with different people and the different masks that I wear or they wear in those interactions.
Right. And that's like a funny little segue, because when you mentioned you're like writing something, I'm a big fan of comedy, horror, sci-fi. Those are like my top genres. I love stand-up comedy even. One interesting thing I always find it very fascinating when I talk to stand-up comics or I'm just listening to interviews is their writing style. And that same is translated for horror and sci-fi too. Like Dune is one of my favorite book series.
Oh, Dune is phenomenal.
What is like your writing style? Like how do you go about it? Because I know many people have different perspectives on what works for them. Like how do you when you put a pen and paper, like what's your process for writing?
Usually it actually, again, starts with a walk in nature. Like when I'm starting to feel inspired to a degree, like I've got ideas rolling around in my head, or like maybe I now know how I want, like the main character in my book, his name is Ptolemy.
Okay.
So like maybe I've decided now how I want Ptolemy to proceed in this particular section of the book, right? But I haven't worked out all the kinks or the details yet. And sometimes I can just sit down and then like
Right.
2,000 words come out and it's just like, okay, like time flew by, everything came out perfectly, that section is great. But most of the time, I think it ends up being, I have this notion for how I want it to proceed. I know generally like where I want to get to, and I know where he is, and I need to go for a nice long walk as kind of a moving meditation and then figure out how he got from where he is to where he's going to be. And there's a bit of a balance in that, because I'm a person that very much believes that my characters need to grow with the story, and I need to grow with the characters, and I need to grow with the story too. And what that means to me is that I can't, like, sure, I can know how the book is going to roughly end kind of thing, but I can't write the end first and then go back, because the Ptolemy that gets to that end point isn't going to be the same Ptolemy that is currently sitting in the part of the book that I am now. He's going to go through changes based on his interactions with other characters, based on the things that happen up to that point. So I really plan it out just like 1-2 chapters at a time. Like maybe 3 chapters if I don't really realize how in-depth or detailed a certain section is going to get. But I will typically, like I'll have the starting point in my head. I'll go for a walk for like 2 hours around Port Moody, and kind of walk through how he gets to where I want him to go and the interactions he has in that time. And then I come back, I sit down, and I really try to plan it around a time where I know I'm going to have like 3 to 4 hours to sit down and write, because when I get really into it, if I get distracted by having to make dinner or something, like I know that's going to throw off my vibe. A lot of my best work actually ends up being at the end of the night, like kind of after 7 o'clock, I've had dinner. Like there's nothing else I need to worry about in the day. No one else is going to bother me. It's just like I sit down with my cat and I write.
That's awesome. I've like in like the walk part is so cool, because like, so when I produce, my favorite stage ever in the project is development. That's the project where you're talking to the director, writer, whoever is in charge of the story, and you're figuring out these little nooks and crannies, and you're like, okay, this is gonna be that. And one of the cool things is, earlier I would be so much down for like, you sit in a coffee shop, you sit in an office, you talk. Lately, though, I've been realizing we do these walk meetings. So,
the walk and talk. I'm very big on the walk and talk.
And I've realized that actually changes everything. Like, it started last year, around December is when I started like trying it out with people. And so we do that, where we'll walk for an hour, grab a coffee, and just talk, because I actually have recognized there's like been a shift of ideas that happened. Like it was such a little moment. This one project we've been developing for a year now, we literally just came across this lady and her dog, which shifted the conversation so much, where we were like, holy shit, I think we like were able to figure out one character's wants and needs, and we were like, that's cool. That little moment just like changed everything.
That's a very good point. Yeah, because I think like there's something about like walking and talking. There's always a minor change in scenery.
Yeah.
And that means that both people in that conversation, at like every instant in the conversation, are going to have a slightly different perspective than the perspective they had like 3 minutes ago in the conversation.
Right.
Whereas if you're sitting at a coffee shop and it's like the same 10 people sitting in that coffee shop, and like, sure, people come in and they go out, but if there is a constant cycle of like 1 or 2 people going in and out at a time, they can effectively be considered being the same person going in and out, because you don't register them that much, kind of thing. So you just end up like being surrounded by the same group of people, and they're also just kind of like quietly working or quietly drinking coffee or having a conversation that like maybe you can hear some bits of, but like you're in your conversation and you maybe don't want to eavesdrop or whatever. So you're just not getting the same amount of stimulus input.
Totally. And like a big part of my job is protecting the creative or recognizing what their wants and needs are. One friend of mine put it really best. They like to get inside the head of the creative. And so like with walking, talking, or whatever, things like that, like in development, I am just trying to understand not just the project. What is this person's wants and needs, man? Like, where's this person coming from? And one question I like to ask all the people I work with, regardless of if they're creative or not, what is this project going to do for you? Tell me that. And I'll tell you what this is going to do for me. So
Personal buy-in is very important.
Yeah, like we're going to put it on the table and we're going to talk about our stakes in it. Like, is this project going to like take me to the next one? Is this project going to be a big career milestone, or am I just here to get paid? Or is this project like just, a cool little story? Because that is, I think, what like too many of us go into something where we're like, why am I doing this? Why is this person doing that? But if we're like, okay, I'm just trying to put food on the table, I'm like, okay, I understand that. Fine. Thanks for being honest, kind of thing, you know? Which goes back to, it's like dating someone. Like, what is this relationship going to do for you? Or like, why am I hanging out with you? Or, like, what is your creative mindset? Like, how do you like to think? Like, when we're doing this walk and talk, or because then I know how much to push you, how much to not, how much to be like, I'm going to give him the space now.
Out of what you can get out of people.
Yeah, that's because that's I think what encompasses a producer. You're managing an egos all day.
Oh yeah, in film it's all about managing ego.
Yeah, so like basically from your perspective, like starting a tech company, I bet you were managing like a stakeholder's expectations, your team's expectations, and
so definitely there is. I mean, this kind of comes back a little bit to what you were saying earlier about like being someone that's always trying to push it forward. Like, because so many things get dropped and get left behind kind of thing, or get abandoned. And I think that's a big part of leadership, is being willing to push forward when no one is. But there's also an amount of like, if no one on your team is willing to push forward, what does that say about either you, the project, or the team? Like, maybe that says that that's not the right team for that project. Maybe it says that that project is not a good project. Maybe it says that you're not a good leader and that that team doesn't want to follow you through that project, kind of thing. But I totally lost my train of thought.
It's all good. But I like the situation you were painting with that. Like, I guess what happens in that is, were you trying to get to that, or?
Yeah. So like, I mean, kind of circling it back to being an aspect of leadership, like there's going to be days when not everyone believes in the mission, kind of thing, right? And there's going to be days when, even if your team was totally bought in or is totally bought in, like there's going to be moments where they have a crisis of faith. And even for the person pushing it forward, for the producer or the entrepreneur or the leader of whatever sort, like there's going to be moments when they have crisis of faith too. But I think one of the major things that separates projects that don't go anywhere from projects that end up being hugely successful, at least in the eyes of the creator, is that they didn't give up on it. That like they, rather than seeing a project that wasn't going well, they saw an opportunity to both grow themselves and to improve themselves and their project, right? Like every project that I put out or have worked on, it isn't an idea of get it done and then throw it out there and now it's finished and I never have to think about it again. No, it like kind of like how you said, you have to sit on a good project for a while and make sure you've ironed out all the kinks, right? Like I finished writing the manuscript for my first book 2 years ago, and just because it's like it's not to a point that I'm happy with it, like I'm not ready to release it yet or even try and release it. I've recently started working with an editor on it, and he's helped me understand like aspects of certain parts of it that I didn't like. And now like that was super useful because now I know, like, I've never liked the prologue for the book, but I didn't know why I didn't like the prologue.
Right.
And then I sent it to him. He gave me some feedback. And even though I've had like 5 or 6 alpha readers like give me feedback and tell me that either they didn't like the prologue for this reason or that reason, it still wasn't enough context for me to understand what about the prologue wasn't clicking with people. It just told me that they didn't like it. And then the feedback that the editor sent me, like, you could very much look at that feedback and then say, this guy thinks my book is shit. I'm not going to continue working with him. Or this guy thinks my book is shit. I'm going to give up on my book. Not at all. Like, the way that I see that is this is an opportunity, like, to, one, shed light on my writing skills in a way that, like, a casual reader couldn't because he's a professional editor. And 2, like, for me to really dig in and try and improve my writing. Because if I, as the writer, don't even like my prologue, how can I expect any readers to like it?
Yeah, no, totally. And I always tell writers, I'm like, one of the most painful things you're going to do, but also the most brave thing you're going to do is bring your script to someone and be like, what do you think? And they might tear it apart and it's going to sting. Take that with a grain of salt. But after the sting, something beautiful happens when you refine it and you change the story. Because I always like to think discipline and consistency will beat talent every single time.
100%. I mean, discipline and consistency builds talent, whether people want to admit it or not. So
no, 100%, man. And that's the other thing too. Like, keep refining that story as much as you can. Like, because part of my job is oftentimes I am just getting a barrage of scripts that I'm having to go through. Maybe I'm not even spending that much time. Sometimes, like, because I normally like to tell people, I'm like, depending on how many scripts I have, like currently in my career stage, I can read them. I do tell them, look, can you wait for a month for me to get back to you? Because I do want to read this. Because I don't want to pass out on something that's really great. But a lot of it is also like in that 1 month when we meet or when I give you that feedback or maybe, you know, I don't have that many scripts and I'll get back to you in that week or even the next day if I really like it. And then the next time we talk after that is, okay, what did you do in that time period when I gave you those notes versus now? Because as a producer, it's also like a test for me to see who I want to work with. Because if you're not being consistent, if you're not being disciplined, if you're not showing me that, look, man, even if you don't want to pick this project or you don't want to work with me, that's fine. I'm going to go out and find a home for it anyways. That shows me, wow, this might be a really cool opportunity for me to like not get on this train. Because honestly, I've had too many conversations where I meet this person a year later and I'm like, what happened with that project? And they're like, I just got busy. I just got this. I got that. It never went anywhere, right?
Yes,
so
if you hear that a lot.
If you're only hiring me to build momentum, get this project going, then that's not my job at all. Like, that's like your job to get me excited for it, and then we can go get other people excited. But what are you doing, you know? Like, yeah,
creators definitely need to be excited about their own content. Like, people can taste the passion, and that's, I think, one of the reasons why a lot of the Marvel movies have fallen flat lately is like they feel formulaic. They don't feel like they were made from passion.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think it ties down to anything and everything. It's like, because I think when you have a formula in place with commercials, I realize it happens a lot. Where I was talking to a producing friend of mine, and he said it's almost like we have a formula. So it's like a cog in the wheel. Keep on going, keep on chugging it. But even with that, it's like, okay, how do you reinvent that formula? Because it's ultimately you as a producer, you as a creator, that it bites back. Because if you have a formula, that means enough creativity isn't happening, which means your portfolio looks the same now. Which means
that's a very good point.
As soon as I look at your website, I realize this person has only done either this one genre, this one commercial, this one client, and I start pigeonholing you. Even if you're doing something really talented, and then 10 years go by and you're wondering why you're only getting lifestyle commercials, well, that's because you're just sticking to the formula. You're not changing the algorithm at all, right?
Yeah, so you're not showing people your range. You're not showing people that you even have a range or that you're interested in breaking out of it.
Yeah. So it's a funny little game, you know. Yeah.
Before we wrap up here, there's actually two things that I would like to touch on very quickly. One is pulling back from much earlier in the conversation. You mentioned in terms of the strike that a lot of these people, like the writers and actors, aren't getting paid as much as we think they do. So in your opinion, as a producer, from your perspective, where is the money actually going? Because everyone knows there's tons of money to be made in this industry.
Yeah, and I think when you say tons of money, I think even as a writing staff, even looking at a film, I think a lot of that money is going to a certain portion of that's going to be either on the screen or as a marketable material, because it all goes down to what can we market, what can we sell. On TV shows, it's usually what people don't realize is with a showrunner, there's like 7 other writers. There's junior writers, senior writers, mid-tier writers, and then there's a showrunner. And I think what the point I'm trying to make is we may see these people and be like, this is a writer, sure, they're making some great money, but they could be a junior writer. They could have like 15-20% fees that their agents take. Let's consider
a really good point.
Let's consider where they live now. Someone that lives in Vancouver or LA, all of us know rent is so high. So I guess the point I was trying to make is we see these things on a sheet and we say, oh, this person's probably getting paid so much money, but what we don't.
False assumption.
What's their take home? That's the argument I'm trying to make, right? Even as a producer, like when I look at commercial budgets, it's like, okay, like I have X amount of money, which is going out to so many different things. By the end of it, what is really left in that budget? Or what's even coming to my pocket, right? So I guess that was the argument I was trying to make, where we look at these big names and this and that, and we like have this like vision in our mind from social media or whatever that this is how much money this person might really be making, but it's very different. And I'm not saying the top tier actors, top tier showrunners, top tier creators, writers aren't making the big bucks. I think they are, but
they're like 100 people compared to the like 100,000 people in the industry.
And,
right?
And what I'm saying is, at the very end of the day, I don't know if the strikes are as much about the people in the current day and age. I think they're about the future of the business. Because the hardest things I've been seeing is, over the years, we've had less and less people that are interested in coming into this industry. There's always this like little phrase that gets used around a lot, which are like, the most talented, creative, and smart people actually leave this industry in the first 5 years. So like, how do we combat that? How do we bring those people back? Because the industry is going to be a direct reflection of the people that are working in it, right?
Absolutely.
So that's kind of, I guess, the point I was trying to make.
That's very interesting. I haven't heard that the most talented people leave in the first 5 years.
I think they just, hours, budgets, they just started realizing that, I think at first people have this want to reinvent the wheel. Then they go down the phases where they realize maybe it's hopeless to do that. And then most of the people don't want to stick it out. They find other ventures, job offers, whatever. But I think there is a lot of room to reinvent the wheel. It's happening currently as we speak.
Absolutely.
So,
I am one of those people with a dream to reinvent the wheel.
Yeah.
I plan on reinventing creativity in the entertainment industry.
And that's what I hope one day to be able to do as a producer, filmmaker, creative, is like, how do we change things and how do we change things for the better? Because I think most of us are in agreement of 80% of the things that need to be changed. So,
oh, awesome. That kind of segues into the last thing that I wanted to touch on with you is, for you as a creator who has found some amount of success in your desired career field, and I should mention, as listeners have probably noticed by now, between both my conversation with Adam previously and this conversation with you, is a lot of people in the film industry wear many different hats. Like, we try a lot of different jobs in the film industry. We try a lot of different jobs outside of the film industry. But for you, as a creative person who has found some success in your respective creative role, what advice would you give to people who are either like scared to take the leap to like try and be more creative, or scared to take the leap to find a creative job that they might want to be in, or just like embracing inner child states of creativity that, like, even if it's not something that you use at work, like something that makes you happier in your everyday life. Like, I think it's very important to have a connection with our inner child, and the inner child is a very creative part of our personalities.
I think the first thing I'd say is talk to yourself like how you would to a dear friend or a best friend.
Interesting.
Second thing I'd say is think of yourself as a business corporation. Think of yourself as a soon-to-be multi-million-dollar corporation. Think of yourself as you are the business. And I think the third thing is like don't let whatever your current situation is define yourself, and don't let your current job define your personality. I think too many creatives start thinking of themselves, oh, I'm a director, I'm this, I'm that, I'm just going to stick to this. No, you are a multifaceted human being. So keep on, reimagining yourself, reinventing yourself. And if you think of yourself as a business, what happens is you start promoting yourself like a business. It doesn't matter if you're incorporated or not. You start venturing, you start networking, you start doing all those things.
Yeah, you become a champion for yourself.
And the third most important thing is if you start talking to yourself like your best friend, then you're sticking up for yourself and you'll
treat yourself a lot more kindly than most people.
And you're giving yourself that kindness, because I think too many creatives we all get rejected on a daily basis. But the people that actually bounce back are the ones that actually have that kindness towards themselves and that can show up for that next call and do it all over again, So those are the three main things I'll give as an advice. And maybe the last thing is like take every opportunity, just give it a shot. See where it takes you. We're all gonna not exist one day anyway. So just keep on giving that thing a shot.
Awesome. Thank you very much for this incredibly insightful conversation. I feel like I learned a lot about production, and you gave me some very interesting perspectives on creativity that I hadn't considered yet.
Yeah.
Which is exactly one of the reasons why I'm doing this.
Thanks for having me. No, it was a pleasure. Awesome.
Thank you. Thanks for listening, guys. Please hit those buttons that help us grow and leave a comment below. If you want to hear more from Marvin, keep your eyes open for his appearance on What's Your 20 with Carl. Now, it's time to embrace your emotional side and let Silent Saint J take you back to the past with her song, Nostalgia.
And I've been patient, I've been waiting for you to come back around this time again. And now I'm craving the way things were once before, way back when. Nostalgia. Oh, nostalgia. It's been some time. Autumn brought the rain, and it's divine. You're on nostalgia.